All right, and we're live for this week's Hangouts. So how you been?
I've been all right. How about yourself?
Insanely crazy. Getting stuff ready in the lead up to ChefConf. So there's just been some awesome there, and having switched to more of an operations role, I did my first major thing at Chef yesterday by cutting over the corporate website to Fastly. So that was kind of badass.
Ooh, are they a CDN type thing?
Yeah, Fastly is an awesome CDN. The cool thing, what differentiates them is less it's less like their presence. Like, yeah, I'm sure Akamai and Edgecast have better actual pops because they're so much huger. But from a perspective of, put very simply, things that I've already done just through their web interface would have likely, and things I plan on doing definitely would require professional services at some place like Akamai. Whereas at Fastly, it's like, here, by the way, we're using open source software, so here's this thing called VCL. It's how Varnish works. If you want to go test it in your own environment, here, come download the entire Varnish config because it's right here.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so um, it's just badass. It was one of those, I turned it on and it worked over the course of a weekend. I'm like, this is obviously the direction I need to go. So I've been kind of hacking on that and playing with lots of little rules around how the Omnitruck stuff works, and it's just a lot of fun.
Very cool. Yeah, I've been working on getting ready for Container Days Austin, which is next Friday, which is so it's getting very close. Speaking of getting crazy for conferences.
Nice. Are you prepping just as a speaker or as an organizer as well?
Yeah, as an organizer.
Oh,
Boyd Hempel was kind of the brains behind it, and we started talking about it in October, I think, last year, and then in late December, early January, we were like, "Fuck it, let's just do it." And yeah, so we got a few other local Austin luminaries involved. We've got Karthik and Ernest, and the fairly usual, DevOps crowd. And we said, let's do a containers conference thing.
that's
And then
badass.
and then like a couple of weeks ago, we said, fuck it, we should do like a workshop slash 101 slash teaching kind of thing on the Friday during the day. And so I've been putting together some material for like a kind of like a semi-advanced Docker, couple of hour long tutorial slash workshop slash whatever.
I'm really looking forward to to. I don't know that I'm actually, now that I think about it, I don't know that I'm actually going to have a chance to go to the actual session. I'm looking forward to Bridget Kroghout's session about how they're doing it at doing Docker at come on, where is she? Drama Fever. I know she's presenting at ChefConf about it, and that idea is just, it's awesome. And like one of the things she's mentioned, and I think actually here on Hangops, is that idea of they're getting to a point where their containers are basically just as minimal of an environment as possible and a Go binary.
Right. Yeah, if you're able to have a Go binary, it's pretty awesome because you can throw it in, any container, the smallest container you can find, like BusyBox or even smaller if you don't even care about a shell. Um, but the other flip side to that, which is something I think about a fair bit, is if you have too many different base images, you have like all these extra layers you're downloading. So the minute
Hmm.
you have a Python app, which basically requires, anywhere from 400 meg to a gig of image because of all the bullshit system dependencies, then you might as well just run an Ubuntu base image for everything. Hang on, I got a phone call coming in.
Not a problem. Well, so while you're doing that, um, one of the things Bridget talked about that made this really awesome, and Paul, I may re-point this out, is for her base images, it was just like 100 megs, not even 100 megs. It was like 10 megs because essentially the image was just so small. They were able to continue. They didn't have to worry about that. They could bring images down super, super fast. So I see Chris and Jeremy. Welcome.
Hey,
Hello.
So you guys working on anything interesting these days?
getting Node stuff, working with Chef and OpenStack mostly.
Nice. I'm down for the Node. In fact, I think I've got some of that coming myself, like Node plus Chef. OpenStack, thank God for JJ, because like, oh, OpenStack is a blast.
We work together on the core team. I'm also
Oh,
on
nice.
the team with him. The Node stuff I've been having a problem with is it's not updating the module correctly. So if I install a module and then fail to specify a version, it won't update to a Node version.
Ooh. Is that a problem with your cookbook or the cookbook you're using, or is that a problem with the
It's a problem with the cookbook I'm using.
bummer?
It does an npm list
Time to shave some yaks?
and then prints that to like JSON, and there's then it goes back in and says if version is there, then use this version, and then if that's not there, then update it. But either way, it returns that the version attribute is true every time, even if you don't pass it. So if you do something like fork the npm module and then point npm to pull in your new module, and then afterwards your stuff's merged into master, so you remove your source URL, it won't update that. So
Yes, there are some yaks to be shaved. It sounds like.
yeah,
This reminds me of like in kind of that similar vein of the oh come on, what is it called, the in fact, Jeremy, you're working at Puppet right now, right?
No, I'm a nation builder.
No, Nation Builder. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a Puppet module for doing VCS stuff, and like the thing, the way it handled like basically pinning to master or like pinning to latest just didn't work, and they may have fixed it. It's been about a year or two since I've looked at it, but like I finally got to the point that there was the folks rather at Wikimedia, they published all their Puppet modules in like this big gigantic mono repo, and like you go in and copy and paste out the defined type that handles this instead of using like the full blown custom type and provider, because it just never worked.
nice.
But yeah, Chris, do you know who or you see Christopher? Or do you go by Chris or Christopher?
Chris is fine.
Cool.
But we also have a third Chris now.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because I like that the name thing is always a fun discussion, right? Like, oh, when your name doesn't even fit in the box. But so I forgot what I was saying. It would be interesting to know if you submit patches to the Node module or the Node cookbook, if you have how the response is from the maintainer. And please don't tell me it's a Chef one, because then I'm gonna feel bad and like have to go like twiddle bits or something.
No. There seems to be a fix kind of out there, but now you're just specifying the checksum every time, which I don't know if that's better or not. It's gonna work. Yeah. Now, normally,
it's so funny. Like, go ahead.
if I submit a patch to like a Chef cookbook, I'll just get on the Chef developer office hours and say, "Hey, can you look at this?" And it gets merged pretty quickly. So that's how I normally do
That makes sense, because at that point, you've got someone that's actually like that's their focus for that hour is to like review code.
Yeah.
The real problem I always run into with cookbooks is like you really want to wrap them in tests, and like it isn't always clear what you're supposed to be testing, or like some of our older cookbooks, the testing harnesses are non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
Or my favorite is making a change to the chef client cookbook. I had hit my 100 instance limit on DO so I had already had DO bump me up to like 100 instances because they start you at like 10. I was at 100, and then I went and ran the chef client cookbook again and realized I had a broken test kitchen run before that left like 70 instances running.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
And that's just the one. Like, and to the point of I've got code somewhere. In fact, I think it's up on GitHub where you can take Test Kitchen and Tmux, and it will open a Tmux window for each one of the Test Kitchen. What are they called? Suites.
Mm-hmm.
In a separate Tmux window and run that. So you can run like 100 in parallel. But yeah, that didn't work very well. So what I ended up doing was actually some craziness where like I'm logging. It runs X number as like separate Ruby threads and logs all their data into Redis.
Huh.
And then like there's a separate web browser thingy you can go in and look at the things in Redis. That's definitely up on GitHub. Where like I just like rage quit because it's like there's no way to go run this test suite in a sane manner.
See, that's the problem that I have, especially with the OpenStack cookbooks, where now we use chef provisioning. So we set up like full stacks, and then you lock a bunch of ports, obviously. So if I want to test 2 different commits at the same time, I can't really unless I reassign the ports somewhere else, and then I don't know if that's going to break anything. It's something that like testing in the cloud was made for, but that's not an option right now.
I was going to say, yo, dog, I heard you like clouds. So we're going to put some cloud in your cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like testing. If you go look at the AWS cookbook, like there are tests in there that they're really like there's things that you just can't test. Like there's not really a good way to test that when you fire up this instance that the ELB that it joined to actually got joined to. You have to like first off specify creds, but also like tell it go talk to this ELB over here, run it, and then once you've run it, go back into the AWS console or whatever you're using to query the ELB and see if it actually associated itself with that ELB.
Right. So,
yay, testing. It's fun.
Yeah. Unfortunately, unit tests can only go so far.
It's been cool, so I've been doing some like CI goodness with the Chef like corporate site. So we were talking earlier that I moved it to Fastly. As part of that move, I wrote like just a ton of, well, really they're loops. So, but like a ton of RSpec code that just uses NetHTTP and opens connections to the corporate website and checks to see, okay, when I visit this URL, do I get redirected to this URL?
Yeah.
When I go here, do I get a 200 that returns this?
So I've used RSpec before for some of that stuff, but I've seen like a big push towards Minitest actually, and Minitest reads pretty easy if you're doing like things locally. It's just like get path, follow redirect to here, blah. But if you're like searching for something like live, like you are, I guess RSpec might be a better solution.
Well, and I'm probably not doing it right with like big air quotes because like all I'm doing is HTTP, require net HTTP URI equals blah, get this, and then response dot location is it set and what is it set to?
Yeah. Sounds like half of the OHI modules are for like testing things. Like a lot of them just require HTTP and try to connect to like a metadata service for a cloud or something.
Exactly. So what else is going on, folks?
I'm about ready to dive into OpenStack. It's something that the Cinder project will provide us, hopefully, with automation around our SAN, which has been a huge problem because our SAN doesn't really have any good APIs for accessing it. They have command line tools, which are awful. And so I really just want OpenStack for Cinder, and then everything else can just kind of go away, but I might as well go whole hog. The problem is, like, with our setup at least, that OpenStack or Cinder doesn't support our SAN, so I have to hack on Cinder to try to get it to work. So it's going to be interesting, but just trying to learn the rest of OpenStack to try to figure out, you know, once Cinder gets up and is working with our SAN, then what do I do? So that's been kind of fun. And I only just very recently started, so I haven't even set up a dev stack yet. So
That is awesome. The cat in the background.
yeah, I'm sorry.
First
No,
it rocked.
And it's quite animated.
I just switched them to meal-based feeding instead of free feeding, so they're hungry all the time. Because they don't eat their breakfast.
Yeah, right? Like, it sounds like kids. Like, you will eat breakfast. Well, I don't want to eat breakfast. Well, and they don't actually say, well, I don't want to eat breakfast. They just go play. Cinder. I have not heard of Cinder. I'm going to have to go look at this. Although I don't have a SAN. And I don't know that I want a SAN.
Block storage management. So if you have a SAN or something like that, versus like just using RBD.
OpenStack's one of those things where it's like Chef. Like step one is to learn all the cute nomenclature for everything. Like, and in the end, it makes sense. You're like, okay, knife would be what I would interact with Chef with, and then same thing happens kind of with OpenStack. Only I don't know. Paul could probably chime in. It's maybe a little more obscure with their namings.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in your use case. I've never seen someone actually try and use Cinder just for the sake of getting APIs around their SAN without wanting to actually use the rest of OpenStack as well.
Oh no, I probably will end up using OpenStack, but the first thing is to try to get Cinder working with our SAN.
Right.
But if the only thing I got out of it was that we had Cinder and it worked with we could interact with it, that'd be fine.
Oh, like, I have hacky code on the GitHubs that will make people cringe because I'm basically exposing a web interface as root. Well, maybe not as root, but like with root level privileges to create ZFS file systems, because that's one of the things that used to kill me about user provisioning is like you would do your user provisioning in the LDAPs because like that's what you do with users, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up in this place where it's like, oh, but I actually don't just want to drop a directory in place. I kind of want their mount point to be a ZFS file system. And like in Puppet, there really wasn't a good way to like go in and like sync that goodness. Like I guess I probably could have written some craziness where like I wrote a custom type-in provider that queried the LDAP that did a thing, but that just seemed, or a custom function that queried the LDAP, but that seems kind of crazy. And in fact, I was at UCSD the other day, and out of the blue, I had this random thought as to a way to solve that would actually be to poke at the to basically just update to add a data bag each time you added a user for like cluster management, and then use push jobs to go across the cluster and add the user instead of using LDAP at all. Just total craziness.
Is anyone here currently using Puppet?
I am.
You are?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I've actually noticed is a lot of, especially the OpenStack cookbooks for Puppet, they've started to switch more towards like in the chef world, we would call it kind of like putting most of your logic in actual recipes, whereas now a lot of the community is moving to more of an LWRP approach. And it seemed like Puppet was almost taking the same approach by you were just writing a lot of libraries. Is that something that you've seen in the Puppet community also?
I'm not sure about in the greater community, but I try to make all of my modules as independent as possible. So they're just libraries that just do things based on parameters you give them versus trying to, like say I'm setting up something that we had to do recently was Neo4j. Like the Neo4j module only manages Neo4j, and then if I want to monitor it, that's in the profile. So that's in something that I write kind of a wrapper around that. That's not part of the module itself.
Right. But when you're writing that, is it mostly like in Ruby code, or are you following kind of the Puppet DSL pretty closely?
Oh, I haven't gotten too much into Puppet's Ruby code, mostly because I haven't needed to. There are a couple of instances where it would be handy, but the documentation around types and providers is such that it's most of the
dragons.
Yeah, most of the times that I've asked, like, hey, is there any good documentation? Someone's just like, oh yeah, just grab this module and take a look at it and use it as an example. So it's good, but it's hard to understand what's going on under the hood. So.
Have you read Nan Lu's book on it?
No, I think I have it, but I haven't sat down to read it yet.
It's not a long read, and it helps a little bit, but like it's funny because basically in the chef land these days I hit everything with that like the LWRP model. Like that's the hammer that I tend to use, and in Puppet I found that like if I had the ability to use the type and provider hammer, I could be way more productive. The problem is that like it's still you get into some really interesting discussions around Ruby libraries and yada yada yada, but we won't shave that yak here right now. To go back to your question, Chris, so I actually one of the things when I talked to Sean O'Mara about this a lot is the LWRP model that like he's using for things like HTTPD and what was the other cookbook he did that was like this? And the MySQL cookbook feels very much so like the way that Puppet organizes parameterized classes.
Okay.
Like very much so like parameterized classes. If that helps. It may not.
Somewhat, yeah. I just noticed like when I looked at Puppet code before, it was mostly like the module thing. So, using the built-in, I guess, well, I don't know if Puppet calls them resources or not, but file, put it here, assign these permissions, blah blah blah. Whereas now I see a lot more use of libraries for doing things like in OpenStack. Maybe you want to parse out something from the command line. So I saw like a whole Ruby function someone put in their Puppet RabbitMQ Puppet module that was like an R partition, so it would take something before the @ symbol and something after the @ symbol, and then was able to parse that. But that's just like a little more advanced than I saw in a lot of other Puppet cookbooks or Puppet modules. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to apologize for just a second for what I'm about to say because it's going to sound like I'm being super pro chef, and this is more Chris being Chris, the previous Puppet user. So I think that this is one of the big reasons when people ask, well, why did you switch to Chef? Well, this fits in that area. Like, essentially, you can't do anything in the DSL that's programmy, so you have to write functions to do those things. So, like, if you either are left with I'm calling the inline template function and abusing ERB, or you're writing a custom function that does the thing that you want. Which means in a lot of cases it ends up being not super clear what your intention was because of the way in which you pass data around, if you will. But that's if you're doing more advanced Puppet, that's the way you solve problems. Is you either like mash it with the function hammer or you mash it with the type and provider hammer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
have similar problems with Ansible. Exactly the same problem. You want to do something complex, you're either doing it in Ginger, which it sucks trying to do something complex in Ginger, or you're writing a Python module to do it for you, and that's not terribly great either.
Is Ginger the templating?
Yeah.
Just to,
I guess it's like
it's in Chef. The advantage is you're still writing that code that does the thing. It's just right in the cookbook of where you're using it versus in some other file that you're referencing it. And the function barrier of how you pass the data, is that what you're talking about, Chris?
yeah, exactly. So like, well, like because I do it occasionally where it's just like you rage quit and like you pull the data in from JSON. In fact, I'm doing this in one of my cookbooks where like I explicitly pull data in from JSON and then like do some transforms on it and then use it later on in a resource. In Puppet, you would have to write a custom function to pass in that and then pass in the file name and do all of that logic outside in a separate function. And if I'm sorry, not in that separate function, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's not always the easiest to grok. We're like, where did this come from? Well, there's some magic over here behind the curtains.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we also switched to using Chef is because we would be fighting the DSL and trying to make things work the way that a DSL wanted it to work, whereas in Chef, you can easily just throw all your Ruby code that you wanted to in there, and it's going to make it happen.
I still like have moments where like, in the perfect example of this, and I'm sure there are plenty of people would give me crap for saying this, but like the one thing that I miss the most is Puppet apply -e. Like I think you can do that with Chef apply, but it just like you can't with Chef apply you can't call other cookbooks. So like you can with Puppet, one of the things I used to do all the time is I would just go like Puppet module download whatever I needed into a directory, and then Puppet apply -- module path foo -e the new custom type that is being provided for me thing, enter, and like it would all magically work.
So that's like curl bash for Puppet?
No, it's kind of like, well, like yeah, I guess something like that.
Well, this is
You guys will laugh at me for this. I have build scripts that run at other companies still that the build script instead of the build script calling like bash to go make sure certain directories are a certain way and like walking through that, it calls Puppet against a Puppet manifest that has Puppet resources defined in it, or I'm sorry, Puppet types Puppet types defined with the directories and things, because I know that it's not going to do something stupid, right? I know that it's going to make sure the directory exists in the same way, and I would totally do the same thing with Chef. Like I know that it's going to do the right thing because someone is actually making sure. Versus this guy writing the right kind of bash, yeah, not so much. The joys of configuration management.
I've never used Puppet inline in a shell script before. I think that's like an abuse of Puppet in a way, because like, well, why didn't you write the shell script in Puppet code? Not like a chain of execs, but like figure out, how you could have just made that manifest do everything for you.
So, and I can actually give you the answer to it. It's because this is called the script doesn't get called as part of the Puppet run because, so essentially, there's long and interesting discussions about Puppet and deployment and yada, yada, yada. But effectively, so what we were doing was we would push up and I think this is actually for our Solar deploy, right, where you would put the new schema in place, and you would verify that the directories that needed to exist for that particular version of the schema, and not just schema, but like config existed, because we managed the config for that outside of Puppet, and we managed it more as if it were an application being deployed effectively. And I think we did similar things where, like, you were deploying an application, and as part of the application deployed, you needed to ensure that once it was deployed, that there were directories in place to do the right thing, like caching directories and such.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's hard because, like, I definitely sit on both sides of the fence. Like, I love me some Puppet and love me some Chef. But I feel like there are many, many people in our industry that, like, are not okay with that. Like, does that make sense? Or did I broach one of those dangerous topics?
Sorry, I was muted. So I see a lot of times, actually, not so much with Puppet and Chef, but a lot of people are using Ansible to orchestrate Chef runs, whereby if they wanted to do something kind of like I think GitHub refers to them as like a canary launch or something, where you deploy to maybe half of your servers and then test it, and then deploy to the other half. So you would use Ansible to trigger a Chef run on maybe this many servers, and then test that, and then deploy to the rest of the servers. And I've seen that actually be kind of effective in some areas.
That use case makes a ton of sense to me. I think the only time I, like, get defensive and, like, frustrated is when people are like, for example, Ansible, when people are like, oh, it's agentless. And, well, that discussion gets into really interesting places because it's like, well, kinda. Like, you're basically dropping the agent in place, running your thing, and then deleting the agent and leaving. But, like, the implications of, here, you're going to go build your Snowflake once and then never go touch it again, which, like, from a maintainability perspective, is not something that I've ever wanted.
You also don't need a server, so everyone just runs stuff from their workstations. That's great.
Right? and
Accounting ability.
That works perfectly.
Well, and that's where it gets fun for me. Like, I absolutely think that Ansible is a great tool. Like, it has a lot of great use cases, but I think that for the things that I want to do and the way I think about managing infrastructure, it just doesn't fit that model. In fact, I think I actually heard someone say Ansible is the most effective way to do things the old way, like to just go apply some config to a box and not ever touch it again, or to make changes to basically like SSH in a for loop type stuff. And which I'm totally cool with, and if that's what you're doing and that's how you manage your systems, I'd love to talk to you and help you, like, not do it that way. But if that's the way that it makes sense to manage your systems, like, because I'm sure I could come up with situations where it made sense to just, like, go configure the box and never touch it again. Perfect example being, like, if you're a research institution and you just have you're just managing a cluster of servers that you hand off to like postdocs and stuff, you don't want to actually rely on that agent continuing to run. You want to SSH into the box and force your will upon that box.
I see Ansible as a great way to do idempotent shell scripts. Because you can just run it again and again and again. Yeah. Also, I think it could be useful if you're doing if you have entirely cattle, so you could just have Ansible provisioning your disposable boxes, because then you just have it as part of your CI process. It emits a VM or something, and then you use that VM to spin up your cattle and then just throw it away, where you actually you would rather replace the entire machine than try to converge it.
And this
But,
is
yeah.
prototype Docker instead of.
Well, I mean, you could use it.
Well, okay, so well, and I think this is where my complaint about Docker comes in, right? Like the thing about that makes Docker really fantastic is if you are operating in a true like 12-factor web application sense, and you don't like, and you're actually managing your database properly, like not in a Docker container, like not in that environment, like Docker makes a ton of sense because you already know that things like, oh, your logging can't log to disk. Oh, you can't actually log into that process and do that thing. Like there's a lot of maturity that comes into that world, and it's like the model that like Netflix is using. It's not that it's bad; it's that there's a huge amount of maturity that I don't feel like most organizations have to get there. Like, frankly, I would say Chef probably has that, but I don't think I've worked at an organization otherwise that really truly has the kind of necessary to run the what are they calling it? Yeah, disposable containers. We'll go with that word. There's another word that that my mind is escaping me on. Cattle is one, but no.
Immutable infrastructure.
Oh,
Immutable infrastructure. Yeah, immutable infrastructure.
Yeah.
I love the idea.
There's no such thing as immutable, but anyway.
gotta have a
See what I
database
mean, right?
somewhere.
Right.
So
That's. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, I kind of have a bit of a spiel that is somewhat contradictory to what you've just been saying, in that in a lot of ways, Docker allows you to run apps that aren't 12-factor and fake it, because you're basically making it 12-factor from outside the container, and then inside the container can be whatever the fuck horrible mess it is. And there's all sorts of tricks with using like /dev standard in, dev standard out, standard error for pushing to log files, a bunch of stuff like that, which you can get just about any app behaving in a 12-factor way, like Apache, Nginx, anything like that, without going down a step to like something that's actually wanting to store data, because that's still a horrible thing to do in Docker most of the time. But then you've already got probably infrastructure handling that you're doing Puppet or Chef or Ansible with. So then you can just wrap that around running your Docker containers with the fake 12-factor from the outside, even to the point of passing in environment variables that get turned into a template via confd, or even some bullshit sed scripts.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that what you're saying makes sense, but I would argue that generally speaking, there's still, well, okay, you know what? I'll go with that, because at that point you're still not hitting the full 12. You're turning those apps into 12-factor, but you still probably have the log files stored locally on disk of the box that's running the Docker containers. But I get,
right, but that's outside of your app, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That is now treated like an external service. So your app doesn't give a shit about it.
Now,
so yes,
my question is,
sorry,
how do you deal with the networking aspect of it then? Because like, do you hard code this Docker container comes up with this particular port?
Yeah, I mean, if it depends obviously how advanced you are. If you're treating it like it was just another app, yeah, you would just say push port 80 through to port 8080 or whatever, and just hard code it and know it. Otherwise, you're going to do like Nginx or HARProxy and use something like Registrator, which stores everything in etcd, and then you just rewrite the HARProxy or Nginx configs based on that. But that's getting more advanced than most people want right now. So you just hard code the ports and go. And that way you're kind of just treating it like any other app. It's just containered into like it's almost packaged, right? At that point, you're using it as like a package that remains a package through runtime.
Yeah, a lot of it also is So like if you think of taking your container through dev, staging, and prod, a lot of people will just have environment variables, and then when you're ready to deploy this to prod, you pass the prod environment variable. So if you're lucky enough to have a hosted database like MySQL hosted, then you just point it at now your production MySQL database, and then you're off to the races.
Mhm. Yeah, I've actually been
Okay.
doing a lot of that configuration by environment with our systems. The application, like we have a Rails stack for the most part, and there used to be like the config database.yaml and config redis.yaml and all sorts of things. Those are dropped in place now by Puppet, and then the application doesn't have to care about them. It just reads whatever is on disk.
We're there, and our devs are looking at making those configs parsed by ERB, pulling from environmental variables and .env and the 12-factor auth. So we're looking at getting away from that.
It's amazing what you can do when it's all just an environment variable.
Yeah. First, you have to get to that first step, though.
Right?
Well, and we have like 10 database servers, so it's hard, and they're all the same database. They're just different customers on each of the databases, so that's hard to pass through an environment variable because eventually you'll run out of space.
Yeah, we have the stuff in Hiera already, so we're making YAML file, a .groovy file, a .xml or XML, or something dropped in Etsy environment. It's actually, once we add support, it probably will be very easy for us to say, okay, you expect these environmental variables instead of this config file, so it probably won't be too bad. We already have the data pulled out.
That makes sense.
So
Okay, so I've got a question.
Conf-D is really good for doing that. Sorry, I was just going to say Conf-D is really good for doing that. I mean, it can read from etcd and console and stuff, but you can actually read from environment variables. As you have a really simple Go template that just pulls from that just has environment variables dumped in there, and then you just run console against that file, and it just bam, it fixes it up.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to play. Like, those are on my list of things to play with, this console and Conf-D and whatnot. I've got to. I think shortly after Chef Conf, I'm going to be playing a bit with console and Conf-D. Totally randomness. So I'm curious, Paul. You pronounced it Ha proxy. I've always called it HA proxy.
Yeah,
What's up with
so do
that?
I was doing that because it was a hangout a while back where I think Jake was pronouncing it hard proxy and we were giving him shit. Or maybe it was just a discussion on Twitter. So I was just doing it on purpose. I do usually call it HA proxy.
Okay, just making sure, because like the Ha, we have HA, like high availability, rock on. So fun stuff. So we got about 15 minutes. Anybody have another topic of interest and contention to bring up? I've been like so heads down. I haven't even been paying much attention to the Twitter sphere to be like, oh, we should talk about this thing.
How about that OpenSSL vulnerability?
That's a good one.
You know, like our internal discussion was more or less, there needs to be like an additional level of like OpenSSL vulnerability level. Like I get that a DOS is a high level vulnerability, but there totally needs to be like a like shit's on fire, yo.
Remote code execution is part of the high availability, high severity, but okay, it's you DOS, you take down the service. No data, customer data was lost.
Well, and even like remote code execution being in the high, it's kind of okay for me. I think where I get scared is when it's like Heartbleed wasn't just remote code execution. I mean, or I don't even think it was. It was key or it was key exposure. And to me, yeah, exactly. And to me, that's way worse than a denial of service.
I would
It's
say
like,
almost any remote code execution could steal the keys, though. So
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, the denial
I
of
will
service
I will
didn't really
grok with
scare me
that.
that much either. Being that, well, how do you fix that? Oh, make your pipe a little bigger. Um, but remote code execution, those types of exploits are like they're shoved into packs like Metasploit like a few days later and are available.
Well, and what's crazy, Sauce, right, is like if go to a security conference and find out how easy it is to DOS a site. Like um, most of us have things that we could, because of the nature, unless you have had a problem with denial of service attacks, you are probably vulnerable to denial of service attacks. Like I hate to say that, but like I would bet that the vast majority, so greater than 70% of people that run services on the internet right now, um, if you haven't had to deal with a denial of service problem before, you are probably vulnerable to some sort of denial of service bug.
and you probably are. You just handled the one case of, oh, they opened a TCP port, they're stealing the Apache process. Oh, we'll change this, we'll drop the timeout, and then there's some other denial of service that can still hit you.
Yeah, so like I think for most of us, denial of service, unless it's like on the order of we're now going to, like, you can open up a single connection and you're gone type problem, that makes sense. But still, even then, I don't think denial of service is nearly as big of a concern for any of us as remote code execution. And
It depends to me on how big the denial of service is, because I've seen things where it's like to go way back, there was a Qmail denial of service where you could just basically cause your SMTP process to crash. So you're only denying service to yourself. There's absolutely no outside side effects. So great, you close your own connection. Versus like you crash the entire Apache process.
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Or you crashed, say, your fat Rails process that now has to come back up. Passenger has to respawn that, and it takes a minute or something like that. So,
And I wonder, I think the high vulnerability was one of those, right, where it was you could open a single connection, run this thing, and break things. At least that was my understanding. I didn't read very in depth, and I didn't actually try and execute the exploit. So, please, what's the? I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I'm not a security person, and this is not security advice.
yeah, I just saw that there was a bunch of talk about it a couple of days ago, and then the packages got updated by Ubuntu, and I just mcollective update libssl, and that was the end of it.
I mean, obviously, this isn't that big of an issue because it didn't have a code name and a logo and a page, right?
I think yeah, that's how you know. What I'm interested in
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
is that
I said, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself because, really, our security vulnerabilities have, their own marketing departments, apparently.
they have designers. Has anyone tried any alternatives to OpenSSL? Something like LibreSSL or
New
No, but
I haven't tried it except maybe in college years.
I do know that LibreSSL was gloating about the fact that they weren't vulnerable to this.
yeah, they said they weren't vulnerable to 3 out of 7 or something like that. I think OpenSSL is quickly becoming one of those big libraries where you're just forced to use it even though it's so giant, like libc or something. But we tried to migrate off to something else, but the problem is it ends up not being worth the effort in some cases. You just have to deal with it.
It would probably Libre OpenSSL is a fork of OpenSSL, right? So they're just ripping out who the hell is going to use this code stuff. It would probably take Debian saying, okay, we're going to replace OpenSSL with Libre OpenSSL in all our builds, and that would probably be what it takes to bring in alternatives. Is OpenSSL just causes so many headaches that the devs go, or the packagers go, screw this, we're dropping in a replacement.
Right. Or if you're doing your own omnibusing like Chef does, then it's probably also a much easier thing to swap out OpenSSL for LibreSSL. But most of us are kind of stuck with what the operating system gives us in the way of packages. So it's not worth that kind of headache.
Well, and I mean, even in our case, right? Like, yeah, we could probably use something other than OpenSSL, but that's a big probably because like that you end up with that omnibus build is still, it's still a package full of packages, right, of different software stuff, and we're not going to go like update everybody else's software because we build on the shoulder of giants, right? Like Nginx is freaking awesome, Solar's
That is
freaking
true.
awesome. I don't know that I want to go find all of the OpenSSL, like fix everybody else's code, hope to God it gets applied, or maintain my own patches. Like that just seems like a recipe for disaster.
That is true.
Or do you support both? If it's like, okay, this is just a configure or build link thing of, well, your OpenSSL library you're accessing is the Libre OpenSSL, but in our testing, this one software package doesn't use it, so it still uses OpenSSL. But that could be an approach of replace most things, and so the next vulnerability, it's like, let's say it was Solar that had dependencies on OpenSSL that wasn't easy library linking flip. That's, well, okay, the Solar box is vulnerable to this, not the entire software stack of all the endpoints that are open.
Yeah, but now you have two problems.
Well, right, and like in our case, it doesn't change. It doesn't fix the problem, right? Because in our case, we're still cutting a new release. Like there's a vulnerability in the software we're shipping. We now have to go like rebuild all the things and cut a new release.
Yes, though it could limit your exposure of, there's a vulnerability, it's getting exploited in the wild, well, which endpoints are open? I think it actually, the omnibus style, it's like, maybe it is worth it, but I don't work for you, and I don't say, this is a business case, let's do this. So I think it might be easy to do, but I don't do it, so I can't. It's all theoretical for me.
And not gonna lie, I'm kind of glad I'm not responsible for omnibus builds myself. So, but fun stuff. Yeah, I know. I'm glad that it wasn't like super crazy vulnerable. Because could you guys imagine doing an entire rekeying of all the things again? Oh.
Yeah. Just having to disable.
I'm not even.
We need to automate the keying and rekeying. Is there some company that is like they have like 3-month TTLs on their keys, basically type thing? Of it's very short, or am I just misremembering something?
That's possible, but like the problem there would be you would have to automate the interaction with your CA to get your new certificates built and released. Like, and I don't think any of the CAs currently have an API that would let you do that completely automated.
Okay.
You do if you're a reseller.
Let's all start up a company that's a CA that's API-driven signing.
There's actually a project on GitHub that I've been following that's trying to do that. They're trying to make an automated CA for local purposes or whatever. But you could presumably make a business out of that, or at least make a global CA out of it.
I might actually want to look into that because at my company we have our own CA structure, and we sign a wildcard dev, QA, stage certificates. But it would be interesting if we could do your branch dev. So it's www.yourbranch.dev set up and have it trusted, but also logged. And so I will have to hit you up, Jeremy, to find out about that.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I'm looking for it right now, but I don't have any of the emails, so I can't remember the name of it. I've been kind of following the development, but not super close. So
Makes sense to me. All right, folks. Well, I say we call it for this wonderful Friday. If you're in Southern California, it is beautiful outside, so you should have lunch outside.
It's
Same with
it's
Portland.
today where I'm living.
What did you say, Chris?
It snowed today where I'm living. Yeah.
It's a wonderful, like 75 degrees outside. It looks like.
So I'm going to be visiting California here soon for Chef Comp, and I've never been there. Like, what do you wear when you're there? Do you just always bring a swimming suit and wear a swimming suit all the time, or what do I pack?
So like we're in like Santa Clara, so like, and we're at a conference. That's the crazy part. It's always funny. My wife gives me a hard time. Like I'll go to conferences, and she's like, "You're going to this awesome place." It's like, let me explain to you how this works. When I get out of the airplane, I walk down to the transportation. If it's a place where I know where I'm actually at, I get on public transportation and take it to wherever I'm going, and I stay there for 2 days. If it's a place that I don't know where I'm going, I take an Uber to wherever I'm going, and I stay there for 2 days. So, like, I would wear whatever you're comfortable wearing around a hotel for 2 days or 3 days, however long you're going to be there. But otherwise, I tend to be jeans and a t-shirt kind of person myself.
Okay.
And if you plan on going
bring a hoodie,
outside, yeah, a hoodie is always a good choice.
A hoodie? Okay.
Although if you're from the East Coast, like you may, like, I mean, as a Californian, like, I walk outside when it's 65 and I'm freezing to death. Like, oh my God, it's so cold.
Yeah.
So are you going to be at Chef Comp then?
Yep. I'll be there from Monday to Friday.
Awesome. As a note for those listeners, we will probably cancel Hangouts the week of Chef Comp. Not 100% sure on that, but probably because I think Brandon is going to be there as well, and like I'm going to be home recovering. So
No live stream. Like, was it Chef Conf last year or Puppet Conf that you did the group?
I think we did Puppet Conf. It was Puppet Conf because it was on that Friday, and I was still there on site. Like I fly up to Chef Conf Wednesday morning, and then I fly home late Thursday night. So I won't be. I actually won't be around on Friday. Well, in Santa Clara anyway. I should see if Chef will send me to Puppet Conf this year. That would be fun.
Just do another talk. The CFP.
I was so bummed I was so bummed my video didn't end up online because I wanted to go back and like rewatch it, but they didn't put my video up. Something about you being used for marketing purposes, like here the chef guy talking at PuppetCon. So, in fact, I intentionally wore a not chef shirt. I think I wore a puppet shirt that day actually. So, all right, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much. We'll see you all soon.
Bye.